Спільним. А найдорожче спільним з того, що нам дав Господь Бог, це є наше довкілля. Це те, з чого ми живемо. Свіже повітря, яке має бути чистим, це чиста вода, ліси, поля. Це те, що ми сприймаємо за якусь даність, але коли в нас цього немає, ми починаємо хворіти. Нам стає погано. І от кооперативи є важливим і хорошим інструментом для створення, власне, екологічних проєктів. Тому що, а трохи пізніше, мені здається, ми зараз повинні розуміти, що ми всі, і в тому числі наші бізнеси, це теж є організми, які живуть в чомусь більшому. І це більше теж хоче жити. І ми маємо подякувати Богу за це і берегти одне одного і все це довкілля.
Проект підготовлено за матеріалами 13-го екуменічного соціального тижня «Почути крик землі. Інтегральна екологія в дії» та реалізовується за підтримки фонду Конрада Аденауера в Україні.
Так, але ми говорили про те, що він онлайн.
Випалювання сухої рослинності та димові завіси вздовж автомобільних доріг є традиційним явищем, яке ми спостерігаємо з року в рік. Спалювання рослинності є глибоко вкорінене у ментальності, культурі та життєдіяльності українців.
Є категорія агропрактик. Дуже багато причин є в тому, що ми так поводимося з землею, з рослинами і так далі. Це така агротрадиція, аграрна практика. Є кластер господарських причин, тому що ми палимо, тому що це допомагає щось в господарстві. Є суто соціальні такі аспекти, які нам допомагають через вогонь прокомунікувати з соціумом. Або я хочу бути сам, або я хочу поговорити, або я хочу вплинути на щось.
Спалювання сухої рослинності призводить до некерованих надзвичайних ситуацій. Займання будинків, машин, лінії електропередач, газопроводів, полігонів з відходами. Через дим виникає загроза ДТП. Ці пожежі ставлять під загрозу підприємства критичної інфраструктури і часом коштують бюджетові десятки мільйонів гривень. Та найтрагічніше, що через самовільні підпали гинуть люди.
Зважаючи на комплексність проблеми і оцей величезний набір мотиваційних факторів, які призводять до спалювання, ми зрозуміли, що чи на державному рівні, чи на локальному рівні, чи навіть в родині ми можемо вирішити це питання, підходячи з повагою і з розумінням до причин спалювання. І так як ця проблема є комплексна, ми повинні до неї підходити комплексно.
Найбільш дружнім по відношенню до довкілля шляхом утилізації сухої рослинності є компостування. До того ж, використовувати компост в якості добрива можна вже через рік після закладки. Його корисні властивості зберігатимуться ще 4 роки.
Коли ми почали пояснювати людям, що спалювання – це є забруднення повітря, що компостування – це не так складно, це недорого, це доступно і це, зрештою, зручно, люди почали по-іншому дивитись, і коло прибічників ідеї ставало все більше і більше. Нещодавно Міністерство розвитку громад та територій України нагородило нас відзнакою за зайняте перше місце у конкурсі «Кращі практики місцевого самоврядування» 2020 року. Цю нагороду ми отримали за впровадження проекту, однією з основних складових якого є впровадження компостування у громаді.
Проєкт підготовлено за матеріалами 13-го екуменічного соціального тижня «Почути крик землі. Інтегральна екологія в дії» та реалізовується за підтримки фонду Конрада Аденауера в Україні. Зростання відходів виробництва та споживання – одна з найактуальніших екологічних проблем сучасного світу. В Україні сортують лише 4% побутових відходів. Решту спалюють або вивозять на сміттєзвалище. Побутове сміття зазвичай переробляють на сміттєспалювальних заводах, що екологічно небезпечно.
Кожного року українці 95% своїх відходів відправляють на сміттєзвалище. Там, де ці відходи гниють, отруюють землю, отруюють воду, отруюють наше повітря, виділяючи метан.
В більшості розвинених країн мешканцям пропонують сортувати побутове сміття в окремі контейнери, де окремо збираються папір, пластики, органічні залишки, скло, метали, що полегшує переробку.
Найпоширеніші міфи про сортування в тому, що люди думають, що це ніде не переробляється і що в Україні взагалі це відсутнє. Насправді в Україні є десятки заводів, які переробляють макулатуру, полімери, скло, метали тощо. Ці всі заводи потребують цієї сировини. І через те, що українці не сортують, їм доводиться її купувати за кордоном. Відповідно, чим більше людей буде сортувати, тим легше буде цим заводам реалізовувати свою місію.
В Україні, за даними Мінрегіонбуду, щорічно викидають близько 10 мільйонів тонн сміття, з яких лише 600 тисяч іде на вторинну переробку чи спалюється. Решта захоронюються на звалищах, яких за офіційними даними в Україні понад 6 тисяч. Вони займають 9 тисяч гектарів. Що можемо зробити ми?
Почати сортувати дуже просто. Це може навіть не займати вас ніякого додаткового часу. Тим більше ви рідше будете виносити сміття з дому, ніж ви це робили раніше. Найперше, знайдіть, куди передавати цю сировину. Можливо, поблизу вас є пункт прийому, можливо, біля вас є громадська сортувальня, можливо, перевізник, який вас обслуговує, справді сортує. Поцікавтеся в нього про це. Дізнайтеся, які правила прийому, яку сировину приймають і в якому вигляді. Після цього повісьте собі цей список на кухні і почніть крок за кроком сортувати. Починайте з чогось маленького, наприклад, лише з одного типу сировини. І з часом ви побачите, як вам стане легше і легше сортувати все більш детально.
Однак є чимало громадських ініціатив, які пропонують альтернативні рішення, що зменшують кількість відходів.
У 2016 році, коли сталася аварія на Грибовицькому сміттєзвалищі, а потім відходи з міста не було куди вивозити, і місто потопало в смітті, ми зрозуміли з колегами, що важливо запропонувати, мабуть, інший шлях, такий, який унезалежнить місто і громаду від полігонів, а разом з тим звільнить довкілля від надмірного сміття.
Доброго дня.
Good afternoon. Greetings, everyone. All our events within the Social Ecumenical Week will be bilingual, so we will have two working languages, Ukrainian and English. If you want to hear everything in the Ukrainian language, please find the globe symbol at the bottom of the Zoom screen, click on it, and pick the relevant language.
In Ukrainian and in English, in order to be able to listen to the panels in English, please choose the interpretation button below in the menu bar and select the language you needed.
Інститут екуменічних студій Українського католицького університету у співпраці з фондом Конрада Аденауера за підтримки Львівської міської ради запрошують до участі у міжнародному суспільному форумі.
З 5 по 9 жовтня, 14-й.
Доброго дня, слава Ісусу Христу.
Good afternoon, glory be to Jesus Christ. Greetings from Lviv to everyone within our Social Ecumenical Week dedicated to sustainable development. The title of our Ecumenical Week is Cherishing or Promoting the Common Good Together Towards the Sustainable Development of Ukraine. This event is organized by the UCU Institute of Ecumenical Studies in cooperation with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Ukraine and the Lviv City Municipality. We also have an academic partner within our event, which is the Leuven Catholic University in Belgium. I would like to take advantage of this opportunity and express my heartfelt gratitude to all the partners and organizers on the conference for their hard work, for their contributions. And now I want to give the floor to some of our representatives for welcome remarks. First and foremost, I want to give the floor to the rector of the Ukrainian Catholic University, Reverend Dr. Bogdan Prach. The floor is yours. Unfortunately, the interpreters cannot hear anything. There is no sound. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can hear you. Glory be to Jesus Christ. I would like to sincerely welcome the organizers, the participants, and the guests within this profusely important event, the Social Ecumenical Week. And the main topic of our discussions and reflections today and in the next several days is promoting the common good together towards the sustainable development of society. This is the initiative of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies. This is the initiative of our partners, and it's all about standing by one another. This initiative is of paramount importance to our university and to all our stakeholders. This week has already become a good tradition. This is the 14th Ecumenical Social Week. In the past, we wanted to change the format, or we entertained the idea of making some adjustments and changes, but it turned out that whatever we have done so far is still relevant and important for the development of our society and the development of our communities. Therefore, each and every word that you will hear within the social week, each presentation by our speakers stands a big chance of changing the thinking of our citizens, and it will definitely have a positive impact on our future. On behalf of the Ukrainian Catholic University, on behalf of our management, I would like to welcome all the organizers, partners, distinguished speakers and guests. All the best to you, all kinds of successes to you for the common good of our planet. Everything that we are going to reflect on, everything we're going to discuss pertains not only to Ukraine, but to all the people who have the goodwill and who understand that the future of our planet and environment and society is in our hands. So all God's blessings to you. Glory be to Jesus Christ once again. Thank you very much, Reverend Bogdan, for your welcome remarks and for your kind words. And now I want to give the floor to the Dean of the Faculty of Theology and Philosophy of the Ukrainian Catholic University, Reverend Dr. Yuri Shurko. Glory be to Jesus Christ. Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to welcome all the participants of this unique week, unique without exaggeration. We live on this planet and we share it as our common home. And I'm very delighted that there are people who care about our common good. A human being, as the image of God, is called to promote the common good and justice in this world, but it's possible only providing we are mature people. And within this week, we want to call upon everyone to be mature, to be sustainable, and I'm very grateful to all the people who have been standing by our side, who have been encouraging us towards maturity, justice, and sustainability. So God bless all the people who provided their unwavering support for these endeavors. And I really hope that during this week, we will definitely experience what we call the common good. So God's blessings on all of you, and we really hope that you will have a fruitful social week. Thank you, Reverend Yuri, for the kind words and for the supporting climate that you created within our faculty. And now I want to give the floor to Ms. Katarina Bilocerkovets. She is a project coordinator at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung office in Ukraine. This is the second social week that we have organized together with them. We also have a joint peace building project. Good afternoon, everyone. Your Grace, dear speakers of our today's conference, dear ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung office in Ukraine, I would like to welcome you within the 14th Ecumenical Social Week. Within our office in Kyiv, I coordinate projects aimed at innovations and sustainable development. I would like to express my gratitude to the Institute of Ecumenical Studies for their initiative. A big thank you to the team of organizers for their unrelenting support. A big thank you to the Lviv municipality for their support. Our foundation is delighted to be a partner of this event for 2 years in a row, because the content of this week resonates with the focus areas of our activity in Ukraine: ecumenical and interreligious dialogue, peace building, social cohesion, and inclusion. We cooperate with those partners that share our values. We stand for freedom, solidarity, and justice. We are committed to liberal democracy, rule of law, European integration, and social market economy. We are guided by the Christian image of a human being, and we feel a personal link to the political legacy of Konrad Adenauer, the first federal chancellor of Germany, who was the co-founder of the Christian Democratic Union of Germany. And this party united the Christian, democratic, and liberal traditions. His name is closely linked to the democratic rebuilding of Germany, its entry into the transatlantic community and unity, and the German economic miracle. As for the latter, within our foundation, we've long been aware of the fact that the successful economic model currently requires rethinking and environmental redirection. The key element in Christian democracy is a human being, its dignity, rights, and obligations. For us, it's a starting point for promoting the ideas of social justice, liberal democracy, and sustainable business. But at the same time, it should be noted that currently a human being is a central factor of impact on those processes that take place in our environment. And this is a tipping point, because basically we bear responsibility for the flip side of liberty and freedom. We cannot have production and manufacturing at the current level without undermining the freedom and democracy of the next generations. But we can also transform our lifestyles within the conditions of market economy, and innovation will play a key role in those contexts. But we should keep in mind that innovations are possible only in open societies. Our foundation works towards peace building, peace and prosperity in Europe and globally through political education, dialogue, and we boast a network of upwards of 20 representative offices. Sustainable development is indeed on top of our priorities list. We have 4 special programs on climate and energy security. They are implemented in the Middle East and Northern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Asian and Pacific Ocean, as well as in Latin America. And the purpose of these programs is to provide for experience sharing and to forge tools that will be used for climate change at local level, especially within those communities that take the brunt of it. In Europe, we can see that climate change is imminent. Remember the tragic calamities that happened this year: floods, glacier melting, forest fires. These calamities are aggravating year in, year out, and we have to pay the price of our lives, and we also have to pay the price of financial losses and damage. In Ukraine, even though our government committed to achieving climatic neutrality by 2030, SDGs are not really well known to ordinary citizens, and this is something that surveys demonstrate. These goals have to be supported by specific steps and social support, and the capabilities of our country are contingent on the potential for growth. In our opinion, sustainable development has to be achieved via market-based and democratic tools and mechanisms. We are committed to continuing working on these topics in Ukraine, and we really commend this initiative to organize the Ecumenical Social Week to discuss some of the relevant political, social, economic, because it's in line with the Sustainable Development Goal 17, because we will be doing it in partnership with a wide array of partners and stakeholders at international and national, regional, and local levels. So only through joint efforts we will be able to promote the common good. So thank you everyone for having joined today, and thank you everyone who will join throughout the week, offline, online. I really hope that we will have interesting and fruitful discussions, and we will be exposed to some new and breakthrough ideas. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies, I would like to express our gratitude in the form of this small souvenir. Thank you very much for your unyielding support. The Social Ecumenical Week is taking place in the city of Lviv. You might have this small booklet in your hands, Lviv Open to the World. And it's true indeed that the city of Lviv is open to the world, and the Social Ecumenical Week is one of the hands of our city trying to reach out to the rest of the world. Our city is vibrantly developing, and we want to achieve sustainable development within our municipality, because we do understand that whatever we create, whatever we construct, whatever we produce will have its implications in 5 and 10 years. It's a great pleasure of mine to give the floor to Lviv City Mayor, Mr. Sadovy. Thank you for your personal support. A big thank you to the municipality for having created favorable conditions for organizing this condition. Your Eminence, Cardinal Cherny, Your Grace, Reverend Dr. Prach, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, thank you very much for this opportunity to share this week with you. The participation in the social week, even though online, is of paramount importance to us. So we are living in an unpredictable world, a world that is changing on a perpetual basis, and we cannot even predict what might happen in 3, 5, or 10 years. But if you have love in your heart, if you have respect and brotherhood, then I'm 100% positive that we will be able to overcome all the challenges and obstacles in front of you. In the past 7 years, we've hosted a multitude of people who moved here from the occupied territories, from Luhansk and Donetsk regions, from the Republic of the Crimea, and we embraced them as if they were our natives, because Lviv and Galicia as a whole have a sad experience after the world wars, because the Galicians were also welcome wholeheartedly, and I want us to keep it that way. Just imagine that you move to a new place, you don't really have any friends, you don't really have any family members. It's one of the topics that our municipality is concerned about, and I want to express my sincere gratitude to the Ukrainian Catholic University for keeping this topic on top of the agenda. I know that you care for such people. I know that within your university you have some staff members who moved to Lviv from other parts of Ukraine. We also have such people in our municipal institutions. What do I hope for this forum? I really hope that this event will fill us with inspiration, energy for victory, but we need to do it with big hearts, with enormous love, and with faith in our victory. Glory be to Jesus Christ. Glory be forever. Thank you very much. And we have also prepared a word of gratitude that will go to the mayor of Lviv, Mr. Sadovy. I think that soon we will have online. It's just a matter of time. Thank you very much indeed for your greetings. And now we pass on to the academic part of our conference. We've got today 3 speakers: Cardinal Michael Cherny, Ms. Dafina Getcheva, and Dr. Johanna Tavintner. First speech will be delivered by Cardinal Michael Cherny. Cardinal Czerny is one of the closest assistants of Pope Francis. He is a Jesuit, just our Pope is. He checked the destiny of migrants, and Cardinal is the son of migrants from Czechoslovakia who found themselves in Canada. He worked a lot in many countries, in particular in Africa. He was dealing with migrants, with sick, AIDS-sick people. 2 years ago, on the 5th of October 2019, he was appointed cardinal. So he became cardinal. So today we are celebrating his 2nd year, 2 years of being baby cardinal. So I'm passing the floor to Cardinal Czerny, who is working as Undersecretary of the Migrants and Refugees section of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. So he is Undersecretary, but the Secretary himself is Pope Francis. That's why Cardinal's presence at our event is also a gest of solidarity with us. Pope solidarity, Vatican and the whole Catholic Church, solidarity with what is happening in Ukraine, and solidarity with the migrants and internally displaced people in Ukraine. Your Eminence, Cardinal Michael, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It happens to be the 2nd anniversary today of becoming a cardinal, so I'm happy to celebrate it with you. But since the talk is long, let me begin right away, and I hope that you will find it helpful and interesting for your discussion. To talk of development during the current pandemic may seem like a fantasy, a flight from reality. Talk of development can also conceal negative attitudes, as when some people say third world development to imply that other regions of the world are behind or inferior. So why do we link development and migration? Why? Because development stimulates migration, and because people looking for a new place of stability and opportunity migrate in large part to ensure their own full development, and especially that of their children. Sadly, local populations, thinking they have nothing in common with migrants, and perhaps feeling threatened, may be tempted to turn them away. In spite of these sobering thoughts, I am delighted today to explore the topic of migration within Catholic social teaching. In order to respond to reality's new challenges, the evolving social thought of our Church calls for recognizing the signs of the times and culminates with eschatological hope. In his recent encyclical Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis proposes to carefully read the modern world and especially its current events. Once this health crisis passes, he warns, our worst response would be to plunge even more deeply into feverish consumerism and new forms of egoistic self-preservation or destructive individualism. And he elaborates, God willing, after all this, we will no longer think in terms of them and those, but only us. Let this not prove to be just another tragedy of history from which we learned nothing. This is a time when the logic of globalization coincides with a weakening of social standards of existence. Learning from the mistakes of the past, the magisterium of Pope Francis and his predecessors urges us to rediscover the central understanding of the common good, which promotes communal and personal development that is well-rounded and sustainable. In the words of Pope Paul VI, the development of each man and of the whole man. And it's important to grasp this, that no one person can say, I am fully developed, if others are underdeveloped. I think it's a very important connection that we sometimes forget. This year's Ecumenical Social Week is dedicated to ongoing development. As I reflect on the unique value of fraternity and the common good, my remarks will, in a special way, focus on the meaning of migration for holistic human development in the Ukrainian context. and for the current situation in Ukraine, I will offer a few suggestions from the point of view of the Holy Father's teaching. At the same time, I very much hope to convince you to read, to meditate, to assimilate, and to implement Fratelli Tutti, because, in the words of its subtitle, fraternity and social friendship are indeed the necessary key to the great problems which are crippling humanity and destroying our planet. The Ukrainian context. To begin, here is a quick review of some challenges directly or indirectly related to migration, which in turn is a key factor in Ukrainian economics and demographics today. Statistics clearly show that of the countries in Europe, Ukraine is one of those most involved in the phenomenon of emigration. The Ukrainian diaspora numbers around 20 million persons. Among these are 2.5 million migrant workers who send back around 11 billion, that's 1,000 million, $11 billion every year, or 10% of the country's gross domestic product. With such impressive figures, one can assume that far-sighted management of these revenue transfers would probably stimulate significant economic growth and, hopefully, development. Growth in 2019 was a good 3.2%, but the crisis caused by the COVID-19 epidemic sharply worsened the economic position of the country in 2020 and 2021. Agricultural production, including village farming, is a mainstay of the domestic economy. With proper planning and marketing, it can address both internal consumption and export trade. Agriculture has significant potential for the further economic development of the country. The current migration picture in Ukraine is influenced by an array of important factors. These include the past and continuing conflicts in Crimea and the Donbas region and the resulting economic decline. Drastic reforms on the state level that risk displacing some groups of citizens and, if they are implemented inadequately, can cause even more mass emigration. In 2021, when the unemployment level in Ukraine grew to over 10.5%, 1/3 of Ukrainian migrant workers abroad were under the age of 35. This can affect national security and growth in the medium term. The Ukrainian population is one of the fastest aging in Europe. This reduces the total workforce and further aggravates employment problems. European and Euro-Atlantic integration, including the introduction of the visa-free regime by the European Union in 2017, probably an important turning point. Ukrainians have a positive experience of migration from their own participation in international working migration over many years. Many networks formed that facilitate migration. And closely tied to migration are the tragic plagues of human trafficking and modern slavery. In recent years, Ukraine has been a major country of origin, transit, and destination of victims of human trafficking. Victims from Ukraine are exploited within the country, as well as in Russia, Western Europe, China, Kazakhstan, and the Near East. Ukrainian children and some vulnerable adults are coerced into forced begging. Restrictions related to the pandemic have caused the exploitation of more Ukrainians in various trades and an increase of sexual exploitation through the internet. But much of this tragedy remains unobserved, invisible, and without response. Considering important points like these, the head of the International Organization for Migration mission in Ukraine recently drew up a balance. Migrants are a foundation of Ukrainian economics. Private money transfers sent to Ukraine allow Ukrainian families to provide for basic needs, including food, housing, education, and healthcare. However, if Ukraine receives more economic advantages from migration than disadvantages, We must not lose sight of the fact that the absence of parents, usually the mother, can cause great damage to the social and psychological development of their children. Abandoned children are especially vulnerable. They need separate treatment on the part of government policies. Another unfortunate outcome is that women returning to Ukraine after working abroad are often ignored by their families. They are abandoned, often without any means of living or help. These multifaceted phenomena instrumentalize people's vulnerabilities and enhance the political or economic interests of certain groups. Such challenges call for more than simple measures that leave the deep underlying problems untouched. Now I pass to holistic development and the social teaching of Pope Francis. Keeping in mind these challenges, let us turn to Catholic social teaching. What helpful guidance can we find? Development can most significantly be assessed by its impact on the common good. Notice we are trying to measure development, and we measure it by its impact on the common good, in which all levels of society participate in a just manner. From the point of view of Pope Francis, it is also measured by how it implements the all-embracing ideal of human brother and sisterhood. In order for it to be holistic and sustainable, development must include the people who need help, not just as beneficiaries, but as active participants or protagonists. When we speak of sustainability, Pope Francis says very clearly, we cannot overlook how important it is to include and to listen to all voices, especially those usually excluded from this type of discussion, such as the voices of the poor, migrants, indigenous people, and the young. The paradigm of fraternity, with its inclusivity, stability, and comprehensive human development of the whole person, is to be promoted at every level throughout the entire development process. Fraternity, brother and sisterhood, is one of the fundamental themes running through all the teaching of Pope Francis. This began with his words just after being elected. Let us pray for the whole world, he said, that there may be a great spirit of fraternity. And at the Eucharist, beginning his Petrine ministry, he declared, whenever we fail to care for creation and for our brothers and sisters, the way is opened to destruction and hearts are hardened. From the start, he has followed and applied the teaching of the Second Vatican Council. As Gaudium et Spes tells us, general fraternity and social friendship are signs of the times for the modern world. The fourth chapter of Evangelii Gaudium clearly demonstrates the social effects of joyfully proclaiming the gospel. And chapter 5 of Laudato Si contains guidelines for building a more just world, better mutual respect among people, and due respect toward creation. Fratelli Tutti builds on this consistent teaching. Its main messages and formal point of view establishes we together and us together in order to foster human fraternity for life in common and peace in the world. Herein lies the prophetic force of Fratelli Tutti. The very title of the encyclical proclaims that we are Fratelli Tutti, siblings all. It reveals the calling to spread brother and sisterhood and social friendship incumbent upon all, including the Church. In chapter 1, which is called Dark Clouds Over a Closed World, the Holy Father reads modern reality, highlighting deeply troubling trends which hinder the development of universal fraternity. These tendencies constitute common challenges that are inevitably faced by church communities, the academic world, and civil society at large. Consumerist, throwaway culture creates an illusion of omnipotence. It leads relentlessly to a leveling of individual interests and to self-isolation, and as a result, to the death of fraternity. in order to save humanity and its ideals and to carry out God's creative plan, Pope Francis constantly invites each of us to share and propagate a culture of encounter. He asks us to consider encountering and welcoming everyone, solidarity, a word that is being hidden by this culture as if it were a bad word, solidarity and fraternity. These are what make our society truly human. It's an interesting ideal, a truly human society. Can we say that of our society? Chapter 2 reminds us of the well-known Good Samaritan as the stranger on the road. In order to recognize the one in difficulty as a brother or sister, we must first notice or perceive their actual presence. Those who are focused on themselves, who are not interested in others, who are indifferent, such people do not recognize their neighbor who has been cast to the side of the road. Recognition of one's neighbors as brother and sister requires effort, especially when that neighbor does not belong to our social group. In addition to this inherent measure of fraternity, there also exists a transcendental measure, which is based on the unequivocal revelation of Jesus Christ. He says, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Christians are called, therefore, to recognize Christ himself in each of our abandoned or excluded brothers and sisters. From this point of view, the culture of encounter is transformed into a theology of counter, and thus into a theophany of encounter. Now, Fratelli Tutti looks specifically at migrants. The culture of exclusion is readily seen in the phenomenon of migration. Because migrants come from many origins, they introduce cultural, linguistic, religious diversity. It becomes easy to divide us from them and to justify excluding them from our circle. The masks we learned to use during the pandemic should teach us about unhelpful masks. These are facades and stereotypes with which we camouflage our egos, always worrying about appearances. Let these fall away, revealing once more the ineluctable and blessed awareness that we are part of one another, that we are brothers and sisters of one another, with whom we live together in and care together for our common home. In order to begin to build together, we need to slow down, be patient and restrained in our comparisons. We need to invite those to the table who usually remain outside our circle. Decision-making calls for dialogue and contemplation, and these are becoming increasingly awkward in the consumerist economy. The rhythms of its frantic cycles of production and its acceleration of marketing set a daily agenda designed to avoid any delays and slowdowns. To oppose this manifestation of throwaway culture, brother and sisterhood must become our identity in all dimensions of common effort and human coexistence. During his meeting with youth in Vilnius in 2018, Pope Francis explained, "Identity is not the product of a laboratory. That does not exist. An identity does exist in walking together, of struggling together, living together, and loving together. Identity does exist in belonging to a family, to a people. An identity does exist that gives you love, tenderness, concern for others. An identity does exist that gives you the strength to struggle and at the same time, the tenderness to caress." And in his message for the 2021 World Day of Migrants and Refugees that we celebrated on the last Sunday of September, Pope Francis invites everyone to to journey together towards an ever wider we, including all men and women, for the sake of renewing the human family, building together a future of justice and peace, and ensuring that no one is left behind. Is there any other effective way to promote holistic or integral development? And now, the vocation of politics. The whole of the 5th chapter of Fratelli Tutti is dedicated to a better kind of politics. Politics is a vocation, and the role of politics is of fundamental importance for the realization of general fraternity and societal friendship. In other words, the holistic realization of our common vocation to fraternity requires honest politics, politicians who are faithful to their vocation and who are always at the service of the common good. Building the common good starts with the establishment of peace and justice. I think that in this regard, the words of Pope Francis during his 2016 visit to Armenia are especially relevant for the Ukrainian context. Today, too many conflicts in various parts of the world remain unresolved, causing grief, destruction, and forced migrations of entire peoples. It is essential that those responsible for the future of the nations undertake courageously and without delay initiatives aimed at ending these sufferings, making their primary goal the quest for peace, the defense and acceptance of victims of aggression and persecution, the promotion of justice and sustainable development. In chapter 1 of Fratelli Tutti, the politics of responding to the call to serve and defend the common good requires us to avoid tendencies toward corruption and abuse of power. These tendencies occur and proliferate when politicians give in to the temptations of a populism that exploits the vulnerable demagogically for its own purposes, or a liberalism that serves the economic interests of the powerful. Politics must prove itself able to encompass a wide vision, one that is able to renew societal structures and organizations from the inside, a vision that promotes multilateralism and that calls us to rethink legal systems on the basis of international cooperation, and a vision to establish goals that go outside the boundaries of local interests. This is so fundamental for the ecological crisis that we have to make our own goals for things that will be achieved outside of our local area. And that's very hard for us to accept and to do. Just as person and nation are related concepts, so too are the concepts of social love and political mercy. At the interpersonal level, this becomes support for the other. In politics, this pairing manifests itself in the desire to build an inclusive society. Among today's main challenges for Ukrainian politics, religious communities, and civil society is the question of the defense of life. From the point of view of the holistic development of the person, the defense of life is not just a one-time action, but means the defense of every aspect of human existence. Taking care of life, says the Holy Father, requires that attention be paid to living conditions, health, education, and job opportunities. In short, it includes everything that allows a person to live in dignity. This is the true defense of life. And now we come to the heart of Fratelli Tutti, dialogue and friendship in society. Chapter 6 is dedicated to dialogue and friendship in society. In pluralistic societies, development of friendly relations and honest exchanges acquires special social significance. Pope Francis proposes dialogue and more dialogue as an irreplaceable tool for uniting different spheres of society by penetrating beyond the boundaries of any ephemeral consensus. the absence of true dialogue and of commitment to friendship always has harmful consequences and can only increase conflict and the aggravation of internal tensions. You can see how this applies to Ukraine. Dialogue is often confused with a frantic exchange of thoughts, a dynamic that does not provide for true recognition of the other, but remains an unrelenting attempt at strengthening one's own position. Not only does this approach dominate in networks where aggression and hatred find shelter on social media, it is also witnessed in angry political debates where the ability to prevail over opponents has become much more important than the ideas being expressed. There is no true dialogue without respect towards the other, their identity, and the recognition of the legitimacy of other ways of thinking. Social friendship and fraternity are born from a culture of encounter and dialogue, which means to search for truth together, to recognize it and its factual objectiveness, and to overcome any kind of appropriation which is limited to a single point of view. Promoting a healthy culture of encounter is a prerequisite to achieving social coherence in which no one is denied rights or opportunities. Pope Francis recommends kindness as a form of respect and as a means of communication which has the goal of not doing harm to others. To cooperate with one another, to not relativize one's own thoughts or the thoughts of others, is the most direct way to transform societal relations and to lay the foundations of a common existence that is fruitful for all. The promotion of dialogue and encounters aimed at holistic development and at cooperation among the church, civil society, and academia is an absolute necessity. Hopefully, this conference is a good example. Pope Francis states that our societies will have a colorful future, enriched by diversity and by cultural exchanges. Consequently, we must even now learn to live together in harmony and peace. To achieve this ideal, however, we must make every effort to break down the walls that separate us, and in acknowledging our profound interconnection, build bridges that foster a culture of encounter. And now some practical reflections on Ukraine. Integral development requires encounter, dialogue, and cooperation. It requires not only special attention for the weakest, such as the homeless, the displaced, and refugees, but also their active participation. In the light of Catholic social teaching, and especially the magisterium of Pope Francis, here are some proposals for the Ukrainian context. First, regarding the huge and growing Ukrainian diaspora, those immigrants are an evident resource for Ukrainian society and its economy. Rather than out of sight and out of mind, they must be taken into account in all political, religious, social, and academic forums. Ukrainian grandmothers, mothers, sisters, and daughters who work abroad commonly sacrifice themselves to allow a better life and future for their relatives. These people are an organic part of Ukraine and of the Ukrainian community. Another issue is mass skilled emigration, or the so-called brain drain. In 2016, Pope Francis exhorted, "Society is called to offer valid employment opportunities to the new generations, avoiding the so-called brain drain. That one might freely choose to specialize and work abroad is good and fruitful. However, it is very painful when educated young people feel they must abandon their homeland due to a lack of suitable opportunities. The government, public figures, and the religious community cannot remain on the sidelines, merely observing. Who is willing to contribute to an interconnected, holistic approach to the young people who seek their future either in Ukraine or, if not, outside of it. Another point, a high priority need is to develop workable proposals for effective policies for the reintegration of returning persons throughout the country. For those who decide to return to their homeland, says the Pope, I want to emphasize the need to develop social and professional reintegration programs. There are, believe it or not, more than 1 million internally displaced persons in your country, awaiting integration and participation. Without its national minorities, a fraternal and multicultural Ukrainian society would not be possible. For example, the Crimean Tatars experienced the horror of deportation in 1944. Still today, thousands of them are IDPs. Their presence provides an opportunity for practical hospitality and mutual growth throughout the whole country. For the encounter with newly arrived migrants and internally displaced people of other denominations and religions represents a fertile ground for the growth of open and enriching ecumenical and interreligious dialogue, which again, your conference hopes to promote. In conclusion, since great changes are not produced behind desks or in offices, but are made with the help of concrete gestures and actions, Catholic social teaching has always looked at social reality from a practical point of view. It offers concrete guidelines for the resolution of those complex questions and for harmonious coexistence in society. The recent magisterium of Pope Francis emphasizes the major themes of holistic development of the person and proposes real, practical instruments for preserving, mining, or harvesting the memory of the past, not discarding it as obsolete. For promoting dialogue about today's challenges as the privileged approach or approach of choice, even when the parties have long been at loggerheads. For joint planning for the future, where joint means all stakeholders, not just the so-called important ones. For initiating processes of reconciliation in the spirit of St. Francis, who prayed, "Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring your love," and so on. And finally, for protecting national treasures and cultural diversity, as well as natural beauty and resources in trust for future generations. This is one of the important innovations of Pope Francis, that he asks us, he insists that future generations be included in our planning and in our distribution of resources, so that when they come, they will not find nothing in the house. The main contribution to today's theme, then, provided by the Holy Father's leadership, teaching, and action, is our learning to work together without jealousy, without disharmony or divisions, and to build a fraternal society where no one is excluded. Enriched by each person and the diversity of his or her gifts, we can unite our community with bridges, not further divide it with walls, where we can transform borders into a privileged place of encounter, and where the miracle of an ever wider we can come about. In the light of God's word, the prophetic voice of Pope Francis reveals in Fratelli Tutti the anxiety that worries all of mankind today, but which also presents the opportunity for transformation, not only for religious people, but for all of society. Pope Francis invites us to understand the reality of fraternity and its concrete effects for building a better world. This is an appeal to people, to you and to me, to renew their courage and farsightedness, and to actively encourage the spread of the paradigm of fraternity inspired by the words of Christ, I have not called you servants, but friends. So thank you for your kind attention, and I hope you find this good for your future dialogue and discussion.
Дуже дякую, Ваше Преосвященство.
Thank you very much, Your Eminence. My team and I are aware of how responsibly you approached this mission of making a presentation within our ecumenical social week. We know that each and every sentence was well thought through, reflected on. So we are very grateful indeed for your words, for the emphasis that you made on migrants, those migrants that are in need of reintegration. Thank you for focusing on internally displaced persons that require integration. Thank you for playing emphasis on brotherhood and dialogue. These are the things that sometimes escape our attention, and they have not always been on top of our priority list. Therefore, your words are of paramount importance because we need to enhance the value and role of all these notions. I'm also grateful to the Cardinal for his presentation and his words, because he demonstrated that integral and sustainable development implies an encounter. So basically, we need to bring together different domains of life. Migration does not exist on its own. It's not a standalone notion. It's closely linked to economy, to peace building, and that's why we're talking about people moving from the Donbass. There's also a close link to environmental issues. For example, we have some deserts and areas that are not suitable for living. The issue of migration is closely linked to family values, and this is something that we have been discussing extensively. And finally, migration is also related to the issue of faith. You gave an interview for the Ukrainian Truth, and you said that faith stemmed from migration, from Avram's order to walk towards God and to leave their territory. So, Your Eminence, thank you very much indeed for your presence and for your presentation. Grazie. And now it's a great pleasure of mine to give the floor to Ms. Stefina Gercheva, United Nations Development Program resident representative in Ukraine. Ms. Gercheva is an international expert in development issues, and she boasts enormous experience in the area of economic development, capacity building at local level, decentralization, mitigating the risks of calamities and disasters. She has experience of working in Bulgaria, Moldova, Armenia, and Slovakia. And we are delighted that she joined our event to share her experience, and she's translating this experience into Ukraine. Ms. Gercheva, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. Distinguished participants, esteemed representatives from the Institute of Ecumenical Studies of the Catholic University of Lviv, dear colleagues, dear friends. On behalf of the United Nations Development Program, I'm pleased to welcome you all to the opening of the 14th Annual Ecumenical Social Week. I'm truly honored to be among such distinguished representatives from academia, churches, public authorities, charitable organizations, and the media who have gathered today to discuss and explore solutions to the many challenges confronting society today. Let me begin by commending the organizers for their decision to select such a timely and pertinent topic for this year's conference, promoting the common good towards sustainable development of society. Development thinking has evolved over the last few decades from focusing on satisfying basic needs to one based on human rights and common good. The rights-based approach puts people at the center of the development process and focuses on improving local community self-reliance, social justice, and participatory decision-making. It recognizes that economic growth alone does not inherently contribute to human development and calls for changes in social, political, and environmental values and practices. I'm sure you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, a collection of interlinked global goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. They were set up in 2015 through a process led by the United Nations and are intended to be achieved by the year 2030. Thus, the reason why the overall plan for the implementation is known as Agenda 2030. There are 17 global goals with 169 targets in Agenda 2030, all promoting the common good and taking into account the three dimensions of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic. These are further expressed as 5 interrelated Ps to be addressed individually and collectively to promote the common good in a sustainable and holistic manner. The first P is about people, ending poverty and hunger in all forms and ensuring dignity and equality. The second one is about planet, protecting our planet's natural resources and climate for future generations. The third one is about prosperity, ensuring prosperous and fulfilling lives in harmony with nature. The next one is about peace, fostering peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. And the last one is about partnerships, implementing Agenda 2030 through local and global partnerships, including and especially with faith-based organizations and societies. Faith-based actors and stakeholders have a vital and critical role as a unifying force and as change makers of sustainable development at both the global level and in individual countries like Ukraine. The United Nations has recognized this and is now engaging with faith-based organizations on many different levels. Dear participants, let us now take a quick look at what is happening here in Ukraine. In September 2019, President Zelensky issued a decree on Ukraine's Sustainable Development Goals until 2030, which gave new impetus to the country's strong commitment to adopting the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for its actions to develop into a modern and prosperous state. The decree necessitated transformative changes to achieve, for example, a significant reduction of poverty and an increase in the quality of life for the most vulnerable groups, a substantial increase in the production of renewable energy, and a decrease in the energy intensity of the economy, as well as increased transparency and accountability of government at all levels. As part of its follow-up and review mechanisms, the Agenda 2030 encourages member states to conduct regular and inclusive reviews of progress at the national and subnational levels, which are country-led and country-driven. These so-called voluntary national reviews are important not just for benchmarking successes, but also to facilitate the sharing of experiences, knowledge, challenges, and lessons learned, and as a way to accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Ukraine submitted its first voluntary national review last year, and in it the government committed to several transformative pathways for the next 10 years before the SDGs are to be fully realized, a period that the United Nations is calling the Decade of Action. For example, in the economic sphere, Ukraine committed to developing innovations and to create a green, circular economy, to improve productivity in the agro-industrial sector, to promote the development of small and medium-sized enterprises, and to fast-track digitalization in both the public and private sectors. The government also pledged to reduce all forms of inequality and to implement reforms in education, healthcare, and decentralization. In the environmental arena, the government pledged to end the unsustainable use of land, forest, and water resources. Dear colleagues, these are times of complex challenges, and the country's ambitions have been impeded by the extended COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences. The pandemic has moved far beyond a health crisis to become a multidimensional human, economic, and social emergency that further exacerbates vulnerabilities and inequalities. In Ukraine, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed and exploited deep pre-existing rifts between the relatively comfortable and the most vulnerable, gaps that separated people along the lines of digital access, income, gender, ethnicity, and education. The most vulnerable, including youth, women, informal workers, migrants, people with disabilities, internally displaced people, the elderly, were hit disproportionately hard. In Ukraine, we are also well aware of challenges that are caused by climate change, the ongoing armed conflict, migration, urbanization, and environmental degradation, including air, water, and soil pollution, deforestation, and poor infrastructure. As the government of Ukraine charts a strategic direction to recovery beyond the COVID-19 crisis, our collective efforts are truly essential. To overcome many of the challenges the country is facing, Ukrainians will need to come together as one people in a whole of society approach. Social cohesion and a widespread sense of national solidarity are needed, perhaps more than ever before. The importance of citizen engagement and genuine localized ownership of the development agenda is essential. Tapping into the fundamental principles that our common good is about balancing actions for inclusive growth with environmental limitations. Dear participants, colleagues, and friends, in Ukraine, the United Nations Development Programme is working closely with national and regional authorities, civil society, the private sector, and other partners to support the country's transformative journey to a modern and prosperous state. And we will continue to work with the government and people of Ukraine by supporting local and national socioeconomic development throughout the country for as long as we are needed. In closing, I would like to say that I'm greatly inspired by events like this, which provide a powerful platform for participatory and meaningful dialogue around accelerating the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you all for coming together on this momentous occasion. I look forward to hearing more about how we can work together to advance Ukraine's social and economic development and development that brings everyone forward, leaving no one behind. I would like to thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gercheva, for explaining to us the logic which lies behind the Sustainable Development Goals and how they fit one into another. And I think this is one of the goals of our Ecumenical Social Week, to see how different domains of life fit together and therefore require that people from all sorts of environments come and discuss them together and take action together. So thank you very much for your presence. I know that you are on very tight schedule today and always. So thank you very much for finding time to joining us for today's session. Our next speaker is Dr. Johan de Tavernier, who is joining us from Belgium. So Dr. Professor de Tavernier is a professor at the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies at the KU Leuven. He is the Dean of the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies. He is head of various centers that deal with ethics, social ethics. He has published on social ethics and responsibility on Laudato Si, which was mentioned by His Eminence earlier today. And we are very grateful for him and for the Faculty of Theology and Religion of Leuven for agreeing to join this session, but also the Ecumenical Social Week as such. And we'll have in a couple of days a huge panel between Leuven and UKU on sustainable development. So thank you very much, Johan. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Could you hear me clear?
Yes, we can.
So good afternoon, dear Rector, dear Eminence, dear Dean, dear Director, dear friends of UKU. I want to say something. I have prepared 3 points. I want to say something about the Anthropocene. In a second point, I want to mention or refer to integral ecology, the central notion in Laudato Si. And in a third point and last point, I want to deal with the understanding of sustainability, sustainable development in relation to the common good, and present a new understanding, which is called in the literature planetary boundaries, the planetary boundaries concept or understanding of sustainable development. My first point, there's the discussion about the Anthropocene in two debate. It's a notion which is not used in Laudato Si, but nevertheless many times mentioned, reference is made to the fact that, let us say, ecology is a recent concern in Catholic social thought. In fact, none of the documents of the Second Vatican Council concentrated on environmental issues. And authors like William French, for instance, are of the opinion that one of the central documents in the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, falls short because of its, he calls that, inability to situate the social question inside the larger frame of the ecological question. Of course, in the 1960s, there was not much discussion yet about ecology. The situation has changed. Since Gaudium et Spes explores the concept of the signs of the times within modernity, one would have expected that it should include already some environmental issues in order to broaden the understanding of human dignity, solidarity, and responsibility more explicitly towards ecology, but that was not the case. It rather concentrated on a human-centered personalist philosophy, focusing on the human being, recognizing him or her as a person, with, let us say, focusing on poverty, focusing on hunger, focusing on a couple of other sustainable development goals, quality education, gender equality, decent working conditions, reducing inequalities, and so on. Peace, justice, the things which have been mentioned yet. But at the same time, it failed to, if I may say, to envision a broader sense of a creation-centered, ecologically informed frame of understanding. I'm referring here to a Protestant theologian, John Hart, for instance. For him, indeed, he calls that, as has been recognized later on, that the council statements are anthropocentric, in fact, strong anthropocentric in nature. And they still are presenting a kind of hierarchically structured pyramid, which is well known, the Scala Naturae, the great chain of being, with humanity at the top as the ultimate beneficiary of the goods of the earth. And there's the use of the rest of creation used by human beings. The rest of creation is there for the purpose of serving humanity. There are in theological circles a lot of things has been said. I'm just referring to an Anglican moral theologian, Michael Northcote from Edinburgh, who is joining that kind of criticism. And he refers things to Thomas Aquinas and the impact of Thomas in the Roman Catholic tradition after the Council of Trent, which for him states that the Latin Rite for more than 500 years has said that the purpose of creation and the purpose of the species was an instrumental one. It was there, creation was there to serve the redemption of human souls. And the argument behind it holds that non-human creation lacks intellectual souls, have no place in the state of the renewal of the universe, since the non-human creation is designed by God for human use. In that sense, these theologians criticizing the anthropocentric, strong anthropocentric, not moderate, the strong anthropocentric impact of Latin Christianity they are referring to a very well-known accusation formulated for the first time in 1967 by an American historian named White, accusing Latin Christianity as one of the main supporters of the ecological crisis. Although, of course, we may never agree with the fact that Roman Catholicism is directly responsible for the ecological crisis, we have to recognize, at the other hand, that the Roman Catholic tradition has been one of the strongest supporters of a modern instrumentalist view on nature. And you may refer to, for instance, the dominium terrae theory, the understanding the first creation narrative, which indeed is emphasizing the fact that nature is at the service of humankind. So, in short, let us say there is still, it's good to see this and to recognize this, and also to see that Laudato Si tries to formulate an answer to that strong accusation. The fact that Latin Christianity has been a partner, at least, of what is called the Anthropocene. The notion Anthropocene is a term coined by an ecologist, Sturmer, became popularized by a chemist, Paul Crutzen, who states that the influence of human behavior on the atmosphere of the Earth has been so significant that it constituted a new geological epoch. And there is no agreed date on the starting of that new epoch of the Anthropocene, but we can agree, I think, that the start could be situated somewhere with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution at the end of the 18th century, at the occasion, for instance, of the invention of the steam engine. The Anthropocene has been linked to the increasing human impact, which differentiates this epoch from the previous one, which is called the Holocene. Now the new questions, do we have to go back to the Holocene? There's these kind of very interesting discussions in ethics we have to take up. Because despite the fact that, and that's also, there is a strong reason why Latin Christianity has been a supporter of the Industrial Revolution, because of, let us say, the question of hunger, because of the poverty question, decent work, it has brought us a lot of, it contributed a lot to the welfare of people and to also the well-being of people. We now see that due to the impact, the kind of technology, the kind of mechanization, manufacturing, the drastically improved agricultural food productivity also has a negative side. Yeah? And the negative side has become clear since the 1960s and 1970s. Yeah? It's destabilizing the atmospheric conditions. This is the background, let us say, for the discussion of Laudato Si. And that's my second point. There is no doubt our common home, which is called in Laudato Si Mother Earth, is being confronted with massive environmental challenges. And this is very much reflected in, for instance, the second paragraph of Laudato Si, when the Pope states that the harm we have inflicted on her, our Mother Earth, by our, he calls that, irresponsible use and even abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. Dus irresponsibility, use and even abuse, dus anthropogenic causes. We have to come to see ourselves as her Lord and Master, entitled to plunder her at will. Very strong words. Very strong words vis-à-vis modernity, vis-à-vis the Anthropocene. Modernity has drastically exploited the natural world. in the name of development and progress, according to Pope Francis. He even speaks about arrogance, an ideology that makes humanity to assume the place of God, hubris, thereby turning against nature and non-human creatures. And remarkably, Laudato Si makes a significant contribution by referring to non-human creatures as our fellow creatures of this world, thereby extending, and this is never seen in the Catholic social thought or tradition, extending intrinsic value to also to non-human creatures, which is a radical shift in CST documents. With this, Pope Francis opens a new chapter about a theology of the natural world in the magisterial teaching of the Roman Catholic Church that hitherto was reluctant to convey explicitly an intrinsic value to non-human creatures. This could be seen as, let us say, a new point or a turning point in the traditions. Non-human creatures, even ecosystems, atmospheric conditions, they also have value in themselves. They have a value in the eyes of God. And we have to consider them independent from their usefulness for human beings. And it's also recognized in the beginning of Laudato Si, thanks to the contributions of some Orthodox theologians like Zizioulas and John Chrysaphis, operating for the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomeus, that this new, let us say, approach in systematic theology has been introduced in the Catholic teaching. So we may no longer see the non-human creation as a mere object, which is there for our use. All creatures are looking forward to participate in the new creation when everything will be restored and made whole. And this is exactly the notion integral ecology. By integral ecology, Pope Francis tries to present the promotion of a sustainable and integral development that seeks the well-being of both humans and the natural environment. The word integral makes a huge and substantial, I'm quoting Cardinal Tuxon during the press conference, difference in this. The second point is that he, with the notion integral ecology, he wants to stress the closely connection, the interconnection between humans and the natural environment. And in that sense, let us say, till recently in Catholic social teaching, the notion of the common good has been restrictive to, let us say, the social elements, as I have mentioned, to some development goals, hunger, poverty, quality education, gender equality, decent work, and so on, notions, peace and justice. This is a traditional understanding of the common good. But nowadays, we have to include also much more. That it's not only the inclusion of migrants, the inclusion of no one leaving behind, it's also the inclusion of the natural environment. That is much more a more broadened thinking. It also be seriously considered. In that sense, the notion of the common goods and the tenets of integral ecology and human development cannot be separated from each other, as Cardinal Czerny has said, from intergenerational solidarity, which is also a central notion in Laudato Si, especially when it comes to the administration, for instance, and the consumption of the natural resources of the earth, when it comes to the emissions and the question of ecological debt. It's very well known that, and that's also one of the reasons why the Pope is very strong, there are very strong statements when he accuses the people in the north of not consuming in a responsible way not producing in a responsible way, but in the first place, not. Dus in terms of ecological debt, he considers a serious lack of political will of countries in the north there's a serious lack of let us say, willingness to change the situation, a lack of suitable mechanisms for oversight, periodic review, the non-existence of how to punish offenders with regard to those countries who do not fulfill their commitments. You see, it is accusing the West, so to say, and the northern countries for not acting in a responsible way. As a result, for sustainable development to be effective, it must strive towards containing growth by setting some reasonable limits that should help to retrace our steps before it is too late. This is a quote from the number 193 in Laudato Si. However, Laudato Si does not seem to show explicitly how these reasonable limits are expected to work. Nonetheless, with regard to establishing consensus limits that will guide human and economic development in order not to destabilize the resilience of our common home nowadays, when a misguided anthropocentrism is encouraging ecological crisis, it rather becomes indispensable to integrate and evaluate human development into the wider framework of newer visions of sustainable development, such as, and this is my final point, the planetary boundaries. So I will, let us say, although Laudato Si is still using the older definition, the triple P approach, people, planet, profit, social, economic, and ecological dimensions, seeking or presenting sustainable development as a kind of compromise between these three. The newer understanding of planetary boundaries and that concept of sustainable development is much more in line, although not mentioned, with Laudato Si, and I would invite the people from the Vatican, let us say, to update their views on sustainable development in, I will shortly present it, in line with what scientists who are worrying about the evolution are now considering as the main view on sustainable development. It is an outstanding that eminent scholars in science have welcomed the publication of Laudato Si, despite some reservations. And among them it's a well-known scientist, Johan Rockström of the Stockholm Resilience Center in Sweden, who praises the encyclical for supporting the science of climate change. Rockström introduced the planetary boundaries concept within the broader discussion on the Anthropocene. Rockström and colleagues introduced in 2009 the concept of planetary boundaries in their epoch-making article, A Safe Operating Space for Humanity. The title is important. The scientific, it's a short essay, aims to offer a new understanding of sustainable development that will, according to the authors, address, scrutinize, and assess humanity's activities within the process of development of planet Earth, taking into consideration that there are 9 planetary boundaries which may not be transgressed in order to avoid unprecedented environmental changes. And these have to be linked to the destabilization of the Earth system. Thus, the planetary boundaries framework should be considered as a framework to redefine global development by reconnecting economies and societies to the planet, and to create a tool providing a practical way to measure human impacts on Earth. And therefore, while measuring, guiding our common endeavor towards a more sustainable world development before it is too late. Its focus is to provide a new paradigm for development, one that pursues alleviation of poverty and economic growth while staying, this is important, within safe planetary boundaries that define stable and resilient planet. Dus it does not, the concept does not place a premium on economic growth and humanity's advancements with regard to progress. It rather identifies a safe space in the planetary system within which, not as a way of compromise, but within which human beings can operate and flourish in a sustainable way. The 9 boundaries, let us say, which are expressing a kind of environmental ceiling that could be considered as safe and just. The 9 boundaries include climate change, biodiversity loss, change of land use systems, chemical pollution, nitrogen cycle, ozone depletion, ocean acidification, global freshwater use, and atmospheric aerosol loading. The first 4 boundaries have already exceeded their proposed limits if one wants to keep the temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius. So the whole system, I just bring it up, but the whole system, it's very nice to, let us say, it could be discussed and with scientists, if you have scientific faculties within your university, that's an excellent platform to link a theological approach presented in Laudato Si with revolutionary scientific thinking about climate change. That's my third point. Finally, to conclude, CST, it's a kind of summary, was for a long time preoccupied, this Catholic social teaching preoccupied with highlighting unjust conditions, inequalities between rich and poor. I do believe that Pope Francis' notion of integral ecology takes as a starting point, which is a bit different, that everything in the world is connected, interconnected, and interdependent, and therefore without any intent to deny the unique dignity and identity of the image of God in human beings. I do believe that there is no dichotomy between humanity and the natural world. The new vision about integral ecology rather asserts that human ecology and natural ecology are interwoven, and to that effect, anything that affects either the ecologies, the human ecology or the natural ecology, leads to deterioration of both ecology. Authentic human development, therefore, must recognize that a misguided anthropocentrism that generated, and I quote Pope Francis, a misguided lifestyle and a technocratic paradigm that places a premium on maximization of profits must be seriously rethought, since they cannot guarantee a true and a conscientious human development that cares for and protects both human dignity and all God's creation. In addition, Laudato Si advocates already for the establishment of setting some reasonable limits as guiding principles towards achieving a sustainable development, which explains why, in my view, Pope Francis' position is more or less, without mentioning it explicitly, synonymous with what is the core message of the planetary boundaries framework. And further on, since establishing a reasonable, safe operating space for humanity is the basis of Ruckström's planetary boundaries concept, it becomes indispensable that human, economic, social, and developmental activities in the Anthropocene must respect that safe operating space. And this is to make sure that any human activity must be within the planetary boundaries and must respect the limits of the environmental ceiling in order not to transgress nor destabilize the resilience of the Earth system that has encouraged civilization over the years. Believe me, people in the West are not worrying very much about what the Pope is saying. This is a special responsibility for Christians, in the hope that Christians will understand, for instance, an old virtue like temperance, will rediscover that kind of ecological virtue in order to contribute, in order to raise, let us say, to reinterpret our responsibility, which we not only have vis-à-vis all human beings living nowadays, but also our responsibility towards let us say, the future generation. Our responsibility has become also an intergenerational responsibility. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you very much, Professor de Tavernier, for your amazing and thought-provoking paper. You also showed us that integral ecology, sustainable development must integrate different Christian approaches. Yes, Protestant, and you spoke about John Hart, Michael Northcote, Orthodox perspectives, Metropolitan John Zizoulas, John Chrysavdis. The latter spoke at our Ecumenical Social Week last year and read the message to the participants from the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. So it shows how we can also integrate different confessional and religious perspectives to understand better how to work together for sustainable development. Now, Cardinal Czerny, who was the first speaker, he pointed out what the Catholic Church today is doing, what Pope Francis today is doing for sustainable development. Dr. Gercheva showed what UN logic is in proposing sustainable development goals. And Professor Tavernier, in a way, problematized the narratives. He said, yes, we have now good messages, but are we not also responsible for how the things went wrong? Are we as human society, as religions, as churches, part of solution or part of the problem? And I think it's really a game changer question for us. Here in Eastern Europe, we fought totalitarianism, saying that the human person is the top priority now. And you almost invite us to ask ourselves, perhaps there is something that is also important. Perhaps you don't have a human being, yes, anthropocentric worldview as the only possible picture. So thank you for this, and thank you for really, in a way, launching our discussion. We have some time for questions if you want to both write them in the chat or maybe raise a hand and we will give you space to speak. I think we'll have a question from the president of our institute.
I want to comment on Cardinal Czerny.
Okay, do you want to do this now? Yeah, okay, please.
It's not a presentation here.
You just need to use a microphone and perhaps so that so I would ask for our questions and comments to be brief and up to the point, and I'm sure that Father Ivan is
yes. Your Eminence, I want to congratulate you for your excellent presentation. I once again can see we can see how well the Holy See is informed on the actual situation in Ukraine. You raised so many issues, so many questions, but could you give us some recipes how to get out of those challenges? First of all, immigration. I worked in Rome for quite a long. I worked in Rome for many, many years, and as a priest, I would also hear confessions. If you could hear those complaints of those ladies who are working as caretakers, as I don't know what to do. I mean, the badanti, you know, it is traumatic. They come over here for their Christmas or summer holidays and they spoil the kids. It's not good that we have more than 300,000 ladies, if not 500,000, not very old. I mean, this is something I would like to hear some recipes, not just what the situation. It's not normal that people say Ukrainians who emigrate, and immigrants are not rich people, that they support the economy of Ukraine, 10%. This is a paradox. Finally, I think besides corruption, because everybody says Ukraine is very corrupt, but I'll tell you, Italy is not less corrupt than we are. And even in so-called Germany, which is supposed to be a very ordered state, well, there is a lot of problems on that issue too. But how can we bridge the gap between the, I'm not saying oligarchs, but the wealthy people and the very poor people, in order to create a middle class? This is our ideal, to have a middle class Ukrainians living in Ukraine and being happy with the country. And that would reduce, certainly with time, the immigration. But once again, Your Eminence, even if you're not there, thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you very much, Father Ivan. There is a question by Oleg Kindi, our colleague here at the faculty, to Professor de Tavernier about theodicy and anthropocentrism. So the question goes as follows. John Zizoulas and John Chrysavgis from the Orthodox theological tradition insist that people are the priests of the nature, therefore anthropocentrism is not cancelled but invited for conversion. On the other hand, Dave Buchles from the Anglican Church and Erocha International and other Protestant theologians insist that Christianity needs to make a shift from anthropocentrism to geocentrism. In the contemporary Catholic tradition, is there a call for the change in ethics to include environmental ethics, rights for trees, rivers, animals, etc.? How far that shift may go? Professor de Tavernier, please.
Yeah, I will try to give an answer. It's a difficult question from Father Oleg. First of all, I would never give up the anthropocentric stance. I do believe that there is indeed it's a kind of invitation for conversion, so to say, from a strong anthropocentric stance to a more moderate or a weaker anthropocentric stance. But we may not give up the anthropocentric stance. There are many discussions also at my university when it comes to a typical question, when it comes to using animals for research in laboratory experiments. I'm since about 20 years involved in it. We are using, which is of course very important, a proportional reasoning system. And we have also, with support of the European legislation, we moved from a yes unless to a no unless not harming animals, not harming nature, not harming biodiversity, unless it's a change in position, but we still keep the idea that humans are more important than animals, and that it is not forbidden to use animals. That's a bit. It's a change in position. With regard to any question, eating meat, we are much more respectful, of course, for vegetarian and vegan positions. And we are rediscovering the old tradition of fasting, which was much more the practice in Christian communities in the past than it is nowadays. Because there is a lot more, it invites us, it's a kind of, I would say, it's an invitation. The newer, even young people are bringing up questions which are helping us to rediscover characteristics of our tradition which sometimes have been forgotten. Another point is with regard to the anthropocentric stance, and it's an open question for me, don't we have to move towards a theocentric stance in ethics? I'm sometimes tempted, I remember in the past from a Protestant moral theologian, very famous in the United States, James Gustafson. I've met him twice, I think, because he was always laughing with in Leuven, we are promoting personalist morals, which is very much, as just has been said by the director, very much in common with a human rights approach. The human being as person, how do you express? And then you can, most human rights, as mentioned in Pacem in Terris, that's an easy link, so to say. But Gustafson was saying, be careful. He was already warning 40 years ago, you will forget the creation. And human beings, you are so much in line with a kind of modernity, which is linked with industrial revolution, that you will lose at a given moment the fact that God has created everything and not only human beings. Dus that it's open up, and I know, for instance, in Orthodox circles, they have a much more, although not denying the position of the human being, but it's a question of putting a better or developing a better theology on creation, in which you can give a good place, and that has to be carefully thought through. What is the position of the human being within creation? There's in all kinds of discussion, be it biological agriculture. I try to involve, and therefore I also tell to students who are not interested so much in theological discussion, I'm telling them that theological positions with regard to the position of the human being vis-à-vis the rest of creation, for instance, techniques in food production, using soils, using pesticides, using total herbicides like Roundup and so on. All these questions could be covered from a particular interpretation using a kind of proportionalist thinking. This is what I try with the bioengineering people. And with regard to your last question, Father Oleg, do we have to, do stones have rights? Does ecosystem have rights? Do animals have rights? There is a kind of evolution saying that, and it's not mentioned in Laudato Si, but there is already the theological recognition that all creatures in the Franciscan tradition have an intrinsic value, independent from their usefulness for human beings. That's an important opening to a very actual discussion. Do animals have a moral status? And following Pope Francis, thinking further, I guess, he does not say that, but I guess that he would say yes. Okay, and then we arrive in very difficult questions, as you know, and I'm also referring to Lviv. Even within human beings, let us say among humans, we recognize that all human beings have an equal value. But how could that be? And I'm strongly convinced of that viewpoint. Mentally handicapped people have the same equal worth, equal dignity. That's a strong point in the Christian tradition. We are really caring for old people, for people having dementia, not having the capacities and so on. They have the same equal dignity. But of course, how to combine that with the recognition that animals also have a moral status? Can we there make between humans and animals, for instance? We have there to bring up a kind of degree or dealing with not accepting, I think, what Albert Schweitzer, with his reference of life principle, he was convinced at the beginning of the 20th century that every living entity should have the same dignity. That's very, in his spirituality, a very famous thing. But it gives to think further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. There is another question to you from Nikolaos Asproulis. Nikos is a deputy director of the Volos Academy of Theological Studies in Greece and an expert on John Zizoulas and Florovsky. So I read his question to Professor Tavernier. Can a more inclusive understanding of Imago Dei as communion, relationship, and not mainly through the lens of ratio and freedom, help towards a greener approach to creation and life?
Yes. Yes, of course. But that's a difficult theological question. That's a point of discussion with in theological circles. Dus if you we have to reinterpret, I think, the notion of Imago Dei. And it's also, let's say, I can imagine in Orthodox circles, you already have that kind of exercise, not taking too much for granted typical anthropocentric characteristics like rationality and autonomy and so on, freedom, decision-making, choices, but bringing in other characteristics. That's an interesting discussion. I'm not giving a solution, but I remember from my own training that Jürgen Moltmann, is still alive, I've heard last week, did already such an exercise, reinterpreting the image of God in a, let us say, more global way. He also brought in the notion of imago mundi, referring to the theology of creation, the theology of the natural world. These points are indeed, for the future of the development of the theology of creation, very important. But thank you for bringing that up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. Now, I'm curious about another issue, and maybe if there are no further questions to you. I'm sorry, but Dr. Gerchova needed to leave for another meeting with the regional representatives and Cardinal Czerny also. So Professor de Tavernier remained the only one who is carrying forward the noble mission of our Ecumenical Social Week. So now it is already difficult today to be to have a good understanding within one discipline. Yes, the disciplines become more and more specialized, more complicated. Now, how to be interdisciplinary in our approaches to sustainable development, integral ecology, and how to be serious about all this multidisciplinarity if already in one field you almost fail to grasp all the complexity. So how you integrated as a scholar, and you as a dean and one of the key European universities probably ask this question. So what are the advice for us as a small Catholic university here in Ukraine? What is the advice like for a larger society and community of scholars? How you practice this multidisciplinarity?
I do not. I try to give some advice, but of course you have to find out what works and what does not work. What is very important, I will just tell you an experience. Yesterday I was participating in a Meta Forum, which is an interdisciplinary working group at KU Leuven at the university. It was a discussion on the focus is biodiversity. And there you have people, I'm very much in favor, always have been, of an interdisciplinary dialogue, just as is mentioned by Cardinal Czerny. As he mentioned dialogue. Dialogue is the key word, let us say. And it's very remarkable that, let's say, Pope Francis is, and he's right, really, that he's, let us say, asking Catholics to listen to people who do not belong to the Catholic Church, but who do have in particular fields much more experience, be it, for instance, in biodiversity. And that will help us to reformulate or to develop a kind of appropriate theology of creation or theology of nature. So this is what I have in mind. For instance, when it comes to biodiversity, you do have very defenders of any kind, a kind of maximalization of biodiversity in circles of professors working in biology. They know everything about birds, they know everything about, and so on. But when they are confronted with, and this is, there you see the Catholic tradition coming in, when they are confronted with bioengineering professors, their focus is mainly food production. Then you know that in food production and use enough food, and since there is the sustainable development goal to reduce hunger and making food much more available, let us say, at cheap prices, for a fast-growing world population. So there you have the, let's say, an interesting discussion about the use of pesticides and herbicides. Like you also have, the Ukraine is very well known for its farming, and it's also providing a lot of food for the European Union. Because it lives from food export, and yeah, so that's a developing this kind of questions. What could be a good compromise between respecting biodiversity at one hand, and at the other hand, the optimized food production, agricultural production? That's a very interesting discussion. And then you have to deal with chemist professors who knows about toxicity of particular pesticides, about reducing toxicity, about, but finally, let us say, because we are working at a Catholic university, we have to find a compromise between what I would call the two axes within Christian ethics, which is at one hand, co-humanity. Dus you cannot say, working at Catholic University, we have no interest in producing enough food. No, because then you are not a Catholic. Because in the Catholic, human rights and avoiding hunger, it's a priority issue. You have to keep up your agriculture efficiency. And at the other hand, co-creaturality. Dus co-humanity, co-creaturality, which means how could we combine it with respect for creation in the most optimal way? It's not an easy discussion, but again, it's a question of proportionality. And the proportionality moves with development of science, development of technology. for any discussion, so to say. Dus that's let us say, the way I look to things. Dus we, even speaking about or developing a theology of creation, we could not do that, just look to the see, judge, act principle of Laudato Si, without listening very carefully to scientists. Chapter 1 in Laudato Si, see, analysis, and constantly dialoguing with scientists, like the Potsdam Climate Shoots director. And at the same time, we also have to bring in a kind of solution which is based on a profound theology of creation, presenting the two axes, co-humanity, not at the expense of respect for creation, co-creaturality. This is what I would present. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your answers and for your paper. Now we still have, I think, we can take a couple of minutes more and invite the president of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies, Father Ivan Dacko, to make his concluding remarks. And then I will have 30 seconds to say what will happen tomorrow and the next days. So, Father Ivan.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was supposed to speak right at the beginning, and I ordered my taxi for 2:30, and it arrived at 3 o'clock, so I have been relegated to the finale. I want to thank Almighty God and all these people of goodwill who are organizing these ecumenical social weeks. The fact that we have already had 14 social ecumenical weeks, it means that the population, at least of Lviv, but I think of Ukraine, know its value. The number of participants, and especially those who present various topics and issues, is constantly increasing. It's not just Ukrainians or Eastern Catholics or Orthodox, but we saw today, I mean, from Belgium, from Rome, from Germany, from Holland, and we'll see all these names. It means that the people, the population of Europe, and also the United States and elsewhere, acknowledge the fact that we're doing we machen doch eine verdammt gute Arbeit, as the Germans would say. And I'm very proud of you, ladies and my dear collaborators, my dear. I want to thank the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and the Renovabis, once again, the Germans. But you know, Konrad Adenauer, together with Robert Schuman and Alcide de Gasperi, built the European Communion on democracy and Christian values. Well, what we have today in Brussels Brussels has become a big bank and a market. It is not what it was in the mines, but I don't want to complain. We live in Pantarei. Everything changes. And but I think we should strive towards this in Ukraine. It's 30 years since Ukrainians' independence. A generation and a half has grown without knowing communism, atheism, whatever it was, authoritarianism. We are going through the crisis of the war because of an authoritarian regime and president. It will survive. It won't be easy, but I think Ukraine is also doing a good job. This does not mean that I approve of everything what is done in Ukraine, but we've never been independent for that long, at least, and we hope it will last. And thank you, and I encourage you to come tomorrow. Today it was more Laudato Si, on the environment, and so tomorrow is going to be ecumenism. And I'm going to talk about martyrs, the ecumenism of martyrs. Well, that's tomorrow's issue, question. And let's thank the Lord. I hope we said a prayer at the beginning, Paulo.
In our hearts, yes.
Yeah, it wasn't nice. You should have started with Tsar University, or Heavenly King. Okay, so thank God for this. Thank you, Paulo, too, despite this remark. And see you tomorrow. God bless.
I would thank you, Father Ivan, for your concluding remarks. I will just invite you to look at the program. So we'll have events until the 9th of October. So we'll have 3 sessions on martyria, martyrdom. You know, this year we commemorate 75 years of the Pseudo Synod of Lviv, which has made Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine illegal, and we'll have panels which also want to bring the experience of suffering of the Orthodox and of the Protestants in Ukraine, but also look on the sainthood, on martyria as a witness to social issues and to development. We'll have a series of panels on forests, on climate change, on business. We'll look at Andrei Sheptytsky as a promoter of sustainable development. We'll look at marine ecosystems and conservation. And we'll have a panel together with Leuven Catholic University on different ecumenical, Orthodox and Protestant approaches to sustainable development goals. We'll have a seminar on persons with special needs. So please study your program and choose the panels you want to attend. Not all of them are in English, but some are. Finally, I want to thank the team of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies, the Foundation Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Ukraine, Lviv City Council. Ukrainian Christian Academic Society has a particular partner this year, which is Renovabis. And last but not least, Olga Tyszkowec and Halina Pastuszuk, who were translating for us our session. So thank you very much. Have a nice day and hope to see you tomorrow. Goodbye.
Інститут екуменічних студій Українського католицького університету у співпраці з фондом Конрада Аденауера за підтримки Львівської міської ради запрошують до участі у міжнародному суспільному форумі.
З 5 по 9 жовтня 14-й екуменічний соціальний тиждень, плекаючи спільне благо разом до сталого розвитку суспільства.
Як спільними зусиллями досягати цілей сталого розвитку та будувати справедливий світ?
Як зберегти довкілля, біорізноманіття, екосистеми суші та води? Як адаптувати міста до змін клімату?
Які перспективи європейський зелений курс відкриває Україні? Яка роль бізнесу у розвитку суспільства? Як сучасна церква сприяє сталому розвитку? Крізь призму екології, економіки, інклюзії та екуменічного соціального вчення досліджуємо цілі сталого розвитку разом.
Реєстрація та деталі на сайті isweek.org.ua. Форум відбувається онлайн.
Надмірне втручання людини у навколишнє середовище призводить до незворотніх наслідків, що сповільнюють відновлення природи. Екологія планети погіршується з кожним днем.
Сучасна криза – це в основному криза кліматична, яка зумовлена великою кількістю антропогенних викидів в атмосферу від людської діяльності. В першу чергу від спалювання викопного палива, яким є нафта, газ та вугілля. Тому, коли ми говоримо про кризу, ми говоримо не тільки про саме таке становище кризове, яке спостерігається в енергетиці, але про дуже значні соціальні та економічні наслідки його, які ми, якщо не будемо впливати на них, будемо відчувати ще дуже довгий час.
На сьогодні запаси викопних енергоресурсів зменшуються, тому ресурси традиційної енергетики зростають в ціні і в перспективі можуть стати недоступними. Проблему вирішує освоєння відновлювальних джерел енергії.
Робота по переходу на зелену, чисту, доступну енергію для всіх повинна здійснюватися на рівні міст, селищ, ОТГ, місцевих громад. І хочу сказати, що в Україні є вже позитивні тенденції. Наприклад, 6 міст України та 1 ОТГ та Асоціація малих міст України, яка об'єднує більше 160 малих міст, підписали меморандуми про такий перехід на 100% видає до 2050 року із нашою міжнародною організацією 350 орг із коаліцією «Енергетичний перехід», і уже деякі міста успішно реалізують такий перехід, хоча він і видається на перший погляд дуже технічно складним і вартісним. Те, що відбувається зараз, на жаль, і той стан, в якому знаходиться сучасна традиційна енергетика, скільки викидів вона продукує, так не може тривати, оскільки нам буде закритий шлях до Європи.
Одним із взятих Україною зобов'язань відповідно до угоди про асоціацію з ЄС є розвиток та підтримка відновлювальної енергетики. Уже сьогодні європейський енергоринок змінює фокус від централізованих систем до систем розподіленої генерації. Значної популярності набувають енергетичні кооперативи, які поступово з'являються і в Україні, перетворюючись на повноцінних гравців енергоринку, маючи можливість генерації, зберігання, споживання електроенергії для власних потреб і продажу надлишку.
Чому, власне, важливо розвивати кооперацію, зокрема енергетичну кооперацію? Тому що в Україні потрібно відновлювати добрі, хороші традиції самозарадності. Нам дуже потрібні оці традиції стійкості. І крім того, що треба відновлювати традиції, це величезна бізнесова можливість. Кооператив – це добрий інструмент для того, щоб займатися спільним. А найдорожче спільним з того, що нам дав Господь Бог, це є наше довкілля. Це те, з чого ми живемо. Свіже повітря, яке має бути чистим, це чиста вода, ліси, поля. Це те, що ми сприймаємо за якусь даність, але коли в нас цього немає, ми починаємо хворіти. Нам стає погано. І от кооперативи є важливим і хорошим інструментом для створення, власне, екологічних проєктів. Тому що є можливість для створення проєктів тяглих, які, можливо, там і не зразу дадуть прибуток, а трохи пізніше. Мені здається, ми зараз повинні розуміти, що ми всі, і в тому числі наші бізнеси, це теж є організми, які живуть в чомусь більшому. І це більше теж хоче жити, і ми маємо подякувати Богу за це і берегти одне одного і все це довкілля.
Проект підготовлено за матеріалами 13-го екуменічного соціального тижня «Почути крик землі. Інтегральна екологія в дії» та реалізовується за підтримки фонду Конрада Аденауера в Україні. Випалювання сухої рослинності та димові завіси вздовж автомобільних доріг є традиційним явищем, яке ми спостерігаємо з року в рік. Спалювання рослинності є глибоко вкорінене у ментальності, культурі та життєдіяльності українців.
Є категорія агропрактик. Дуже багато причин є в тому, що ми так поводимося з землею, з рослинами і так далі. Це така агротрадиція, аграрна практика. Є кластер господарських причин, тому що ми палимо, тому що це допомагає щось в господарстві. Є суто соціальні такі аспекти, які нам допомагають через вогонь прокомунікувати з соціумом. Або я хочу бути сам, або я хочу поговорити, або я хочу вплинути на щось.
Спалювання сухої рослинності призводить до некерованих надзвичайних ситуацій, займання будинків, машин, лінії електропередач, газопроводів, полігонів з відходами. Через дим виникає загроза ДТП. Ці пожежі ставлять під загрозу підприємства критичної інфраструктури і часом коштують бюджетові десятки мільйонів гривень. Та найтрагічніше, що через самовільні підпали гинуть люди.
Зважаючи на комплексність проблеми і оцей величезний набір мотиваційних факторів, які призводять до спалювання, ми зрозуміли, що чи на державному рівні, чи на локальному рівні, чи навіть в родині ми можемо вирішити це питання, підходячи з повагою і з розумінням до причин спалювання. І так як ця проблема є комплексна, ми повинні до неї підходити комплексно.
Найбільш дружнім по відношенню до довкілля шляхом утилізації сухої рослинності є компостування. До того ж, використовувати компост в якості добрива можна вже через рік після закладки. Його корисні властивості зберігатимуться ще 4 роки.
Коли ми почали пояснювати людям, що спалювання – це є забруднення повітря, що компостування – це не так складно, це недорого, це доступно і це, зрештою, зручно, люди почали по-іншому дивитись, і коло прибічників ідеї ставало все більше і більше. Нещодавно Міністерство розвитку громад та територій України нагородило нас відзнакою за зайняте перше місце у конкурсі «Кращі практики місцевого самоврядування» 2020 року. Цю нагороду ми отримали за впровадження проекту, однією з основних складових якого є впровадження компостування у громаді.
Проєкт підготовлено за матеріалами 13-го екуменічного соціального тижня «Почути крик землі. Інтегральна екологія в дії» та реалізовується за підтримки фонду Конрада Аденауера в Україні. Зростання відходів виробництва та споживання – одна з найактуальніших екологічних проблем сучасного світу. В Україні сортують лише 4% побутових відходів. Решту спалюють або вивозять на сміттєзвалище. Побутове сміття зазвичай переробляють на сміттєспалювальних заводах, що екологічно небезпечно.
Кожного року українці 95% своїх відходів відправляють на сміттєзвалище. Там, де ці відходи гниють, отруюють землю, отруюють воду, отруюють наше повітря, виділяючи метан.
В більшості розвинених країн мешканцям пропонують сортувати побутове сміття в окремі контейнери, де окремо збираються папір, пластики, органічні залишки, скло, метали, що полегшує переробку.
Найпоширеніші міфи про сортування в тому, що люди думають, що це ніде не переробляється і що в Україні взагалі це відсутнє. Насправді в Україні є десятки заводів, які переробляють макулатуру, полімери, скло, метали тощо. Ці всі заводи потребують цієї сировини. І через те, що українці не сортують, їм доводиться її купувати за кордоном. Відповідно, чим більше людей буде сортувати, тим легше буде цим заводам реалізовувати свою місію.
В Україні, за даними Мінрегіонбуду, щорічно викидають близько 10 мільйонів тонн сміття, з яких лише 600 тисяч іде на вторинну переробку чи спалюється. Решта захоронюються на звалищах, яких за офіційними даними в Україні понад 6 тисяч. Вони займають 9 тисяч гектарів.